Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast with Adam, Cameron, and Emily. Today's hosts are Adam Jones and Cameron Horan.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name's Adam Jones. Our crack team of agronomists, plus Cameron, is on the line here this morning with us. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
All right, guys. So it is May the 10th. I'm pretty sure it's rained almost every other day since we last recorded, so I don't think too terribly many areas have turned wheels, other than maybe putting some wheat fungicide on and been some drones and some airplanes up around. I know that, but that doesn't mean we don't have pressing topics to talk about today. I wish they were more related to putting the rest of this crop in the ground, but they are what they are, and we're dealt with what we're dealt with. So we're going to go around the horn this morning and kind of let everybody give a quick crop update and kind of go into one of our kind of pressing issues that we pulled up this morning. So anyway, we're going to start over there with Kevin Moore. So Kevin, take it away.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's been wet for a couple of weeks. Not much action in the field, but we did have crops planted before it got wet. So we're kind of watching how those are doing. But with excessive rain, looks like there's going to be some areas that don't have adequate stands where we need to start talking about replanting and all the things to think about when making that decision.
Kevin, when we've got some growers that, they may want to go replant a cornfield, but they may want to have the decision to spray clethodim or a select type product, right? How do you, especially when you look at the long range forecast and you've got rain scheduled, so sporadically now where we've got 3-4 times, how do you kind of make a decision on whether or not that's even impactful enough when you have to wait that 7 days from spray to replant? Because you go out and spray, it may end up being another 2-3 weeks before you actually get to replant. Kind of how do you walk through growers with that?
Yeah, so we need to, I guess, first look at that stand. Do we even need to replant? Which, if a guy's concerned about it, generally he's seeing gaps out there. We can, if we have a low population but an even stand, which that's going to be probably going to be kind of rare, but we can still get some pretty good yields if the stand's even. And by that I mean pretty equal distance in between each plant. But when we have spotty stands, we and we're not, might have big huge gaps, bare spots through the field, spots with corn, spots without corn. We're probably looking at a replant situation. And sometimes we have cases where up north we've got hills. We might have the whole bottom area that got flooded or just a poor stand from saturated soils, and the hill in our hill ground might look just fine. So, but if we need to, we need an even stand in an area. So if we're going to replant, we need to look at in corn. We need to look at the whole field, or if we have some big areas, we can kind of section off, because we need to terminate that corn. That if we are going to replant, we need to terminate any corn that's up, or that's just going to act like a weed. So then we can look at herbicides, look at the forecast, or if tillage is an option also. Sometimes if we've got flat fields that may not be no-till, that's something we can look at to terminate a poor stand. But in a no-till situation on highly erodible ground, we've got to look at herbicides. So you mentioned clethodim. There's a waiting period. Clethodim is typically a good option for really small corn. Corn that growing point's not really starting to come out of the ground yet. But yeah, it's 6 days. By label, we don't want to damage our, with that herbicide, we don't want to damage our corn that we're going to be replanting. But when we get a few more leaves on corn, when we get to V3, V4, which there is a lot of corn to that point now that it's had plenty of time to grow, we can look at Gramoxone and Syncor as an option, and there's not a waiting period there. Also, if it's not if it is not Liberty Link corn, Liberty on its own is not that great for terminating a stand of corn, but if you add atrazine to it, something happens there, and we got a lot better control there. So we do have some options other than clethodim, but if the corn's really small, clethodim is typically going to be the best choice. We just have to wait. But so when you look at the growth stage, look at the forecast, every situation is going to be unique there. It is probably pretty long-winded, but a lot of things that go into it.
I think you hit on exactly what I was hoping is that it's not an easy cut. It's not a cookie cutter decision, Kevin, is that there's so many factors that go into it. We just have to make sure we're accounting for all those. It's different for each farmer too.
Yeah, and I think the decision process changes a little bit as we tick through the calendar here. As well, it's May 10th now, which I'm not nervous about at all, actually. But you start looking at the 2-week forecast and thinking about what date it's going to be at the end of that, and it does make you nervous just a little bit, on the corn side of things, and terminating, some of those stands that you may do it in a heartbeat early on, but later on it starts to look a little better, right?
Yep, sure.
What about on beans, Kevin? A little different story, and I know you guys have done quite a bit of work on bean population and what actually works and stuff like that. So,
sure. Well, one thing with beans that is not the case with corn is we do have the ability just to take the planter back through there without terminating a crop and touch up some spots, which that makes it easier there with beans being a crop that mature on day length. If anything planted later and reproductive wise, we might have some shorter. The replanted beans might be shorter, but they're generally going to be pretty close in flowering and grain development. If we're planting a similar maturity soybean, just because a lot of things won't even start until June 21st as far as the reproductive stages go. So that's an option there. It can be an option there in soybeans that does make that decision easier, because might not have to worry about terminating a crop and looking at all the things that go into that. But still, we want to make sure, is it worth our time to do that? With beans are, the way beans grow, they can adapt to pretty well to lower populations. Even a stand of 80,000, we're generally looking at 100% yield potential there. Even if we've planted it at 140, even 60,000, we're looking at about 90% yield potential there. So we need to look at our stand counts and the calendar. As the calendar gets later, we do lose some yield potential on those replants, but also with beans, we can get into late May, early June and still have real high yield potential. So we want to look at the population we have. We want to look at the calendar. What if we have a low enough stand in areas to and that we're going to see some yield loss, based on the calendar date when we can do it, when we can touch or replant. Is that yield potential at that calendar date on the replanted beans going to make up for the losses based on the stand? So a lot with corn, it's going to be, every situation might be pretty unique, or to where we just need to have that conversation to look at all the factors to make that decision.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I think you nailed it there, Kevin. And keep in mind, a lot of these beans that we're talking about evaluating stands on were planted April 10th. There's a lot of time for vegetative growth and for those beans to do exactly what you said, being in the ground that early. So good stuff. Shannon, let's bounce over to you. Give us a quick little crop update there for Southwest Missouri, Southeast Kansas. And I think you were wanting to talk about top dress recommendations on corn.
Yeah, so same as Kevin said, it's been wet the last couple weeks. I think in the last 14 to 21 days, we're upwards of almost 10 inches, 12 inches in places. So pretty wet, making a lot of the same decisions that Kevin just talked about and replanting on corn, what we're going to do. One thing I'd add to Kevin's talk is, you mentioned the calendar and, what time of year it is. A lot of this corn down here is only V2, V3. That's only 350 heat units. We have a lot of cool, wet soils right now. We haven't had a lot of heat units. It's taken weeks to get to that point. And when we get the warm summer weather, that's more like days. So really, when we think about that, we're not going to be that much farther behind if we take a little bit of time and replant. But that's what we're looking at. Another thing we're looking at, once it does dry out, which could be hopefully next week, but we've got more rain chances Monday and middle of the week next week. It may be another 2 weeks. This corn's really going to pop when we start hitting those 80, 85-degree days. And so we need to be prepared for side dress, getting that nitrogen out there. Just because we're in restriction with height, that corn's going to go from just being a boot top high to waist high pretty fast, quickly over our head. So it's a pretty sensitive time window we've got. Generally, we've got that list of guys that plan on side dressing every year. We run our niche track in model, or we're making the Rex by hand. They go in with the planned base rate up front, and we know for sure we're going to be side dressing. What may be a little bit different this year is with all this rain, we have lost quite a bit of nitrogen. I ran some reports earlier in the week, and depending on the source and if it was treated or not, we've lost anywhere from 30 units to upwards of almost 100 units already since planting. And a lot of that comes from denitrification. We lose a little bit to leaching, but a lot of our loss is more denitrification, saturated soils, water ponding on fields. Especially when you set for a long extended time like we have. We've got fields that have had water on them for 2 weeks and it hasn't receded. So that's concerning. If we're trying to hit our end goal, potential a lot of nitrogen loss, especially when we put it all already on. So we need to make sure we're having those conversations and getting out there. Anyone who is in NutriTrack or CropTrack has access to our nitrogen model. All we need is some in-field data, get it entered into our model, and gives us a pretty good idea of what we've lost, what we may be needing to get to our end goal. The big thing is getting that plan and having that plan, because when it does dry out, we're going to be hitting it with herbicide. We're going to be hitting the side dress. We're going to be trying to burn down beans, try to plant beans. We're going to have wheat harvest somewhere in there, so it's gonna be busy. So we need to make sure we have that plan scheduled. Get with our team, so we have our rigs ready to go. And we can kind of hit it efficiently and not be falling behind on it.
Yeah, I think the big thing that you mentioned, or the big thing that I kind of pulled out of what you said there, Shannon, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just kind of that there's a lot of folks that kind of sit on the fence sometimes when it comes to side dress or top dress or however you want to call it. But I really think that's kind of part of a nitrogen management strategy that we line out way ahead of time, and that goes into what we've put down ahead of time and things like that. And that way you're kind of, you mentioned, communication with your team there, but that way you're kind of already on the radar of everybody. It's like, okay, we know we have these acres of corn top dress to do. And, we can help a lot with that size and timing and when we can get over it and all those kind of things too, if it's all kind of part of that nitrogen management plan. So.
Exactly.
Good stuff. All right, Jesse, hopefully the drier weather has been nicer to you, but I'm not sure that it has. I know you wanted to give us a quick crop update, and I think you wanted to talk about weed control issues.
Yeah, no, we've been in the same boat. We've been wet for 2 weeks. Some places it's been scattered more for us. It just hadn't been a blanket, but we've been wet. Little crop update. I mean, not a lot's happening besides everything's growing really good. We've been in the 80s pretty well the last 2 weeks. So we got corn that's B8, B9. We got beans that are third dry foliate already, which is good for us. With replant, it's not as big of a deal because we got out and planted a lot of stuff in the March 1st, April. So most of our crop was established before we started getting all this rain. But on the flip side of that, I'm going to kind of talk about weed control. And I'm going to pause for a minute here because we've talked about replants, we talked about top dress rag. I'm going to talk about weed control. Is like prioritizing these things is going to be a big deal. And it's going to be different for every grower. And some guys prioritize things wrong this spring. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about a little bit. We got some messes that are going to come up, and it sounds like I'm judging guys. Well, you shouldn't have done this. We should have done that. Well, hindsight's 20/20. We just kind of got to accept where we're at and learn from it. And I think guys got used to us having 2 years of dry weather. Like they did. So now we're all of a sudden, we're the complete opposite. And if anything, we're probably back to a normal spring now compared to what we have been. So, but what we got is a couple different situations. We got fields that aren't planted and are woolly. We got fields that were planted, and instead of putting a pre on, guys kept planting. So we got corn that's V3, V4 that ain't never been sprayed and got weeds. And then we got some fields that had a pre on it. Guys didn't get posted. So we got V5, V6 corn that's starting to get weeds in it. So it's a mess. We're looking at another week, 10 days of rain. So you're looking at the earliest. If we miss everything, it's still going to be in the next week before anybody gets in and sprays. So you take another week of this corn growing, and even the beans growing, that we got the same situation, and it could be iffy. So there's a couple different things we're talking about. First one is just managing expectations. Like you got to understand where you're at, because between coverage and weed size and all, there's not going to be no silver bullet where we're going to clean all these fields up and move on. So we've been talking about drones, which with drones, you kind of got to manage expectations. I mean, you got the same deal. Yeah, we can get out there and get it sprayed maybe in a couple of days, but a drone's only putting 3 gallons out versus your spray rig will put 15 to 20. And then you're limited on what you can spray. One of our kind of go-to recs right now is just Halix GT, just because it has an aerial label. And it's a very, very good product used the right way. But when we start looking at flying it on bigger weeds, bigger corn with crop canopy, it's just, again, manage expectations. So talking about that, it's just kind of understanding where you're at and making the best decision and just living with it. Because some of this is just, we're going to be up spray once, whether it's with the ground rig in 10 days when it dries out, or the rig, and it's going to have to be what it's going to be. And I hate being that way, but it's realistic. Beans, it's not as big of a deal because we have Enlist, we have Dicamba, we have Liberty, and especially with Liberty being cheap this year, we can go hammer them beans twice with Liberty and probably have a decent success rate. It's not ideal, but it's better than the situation we are in some of this corn ground when we're going to try to spray HPPDs or even status out of a spray rig when it dries out with the corn being big. It's not going to be a I'm tongue-tied this morning, successful. And then the other thing is these fields that just ain't been touched. I mean, you're going to have bigger marestail, bigger pigweeds, you're going to have thick grass, and you're going to have to get them under control, and you're going to have to understand what weed's more important, because we look at, you can spray Roundup and 2,4-D on a lot of these fields and get it, but you're going to have to wait a week before you can get in there and get planted to let everything die. But on the flip side, we run out there with Gramoxone and Metribuzin, we may get a lot of the smaller pigweeds and marestail, but you're not going to fully kill the big ones. And a lot of the grass is going to come back. So you're looking at coming back and posting it pretty quick, or cleaning it up a little bit more with a pre after you plant. And I don't want to get too deep in different situations and what we're doing, because honestly, this is where our job becomes more of an art than it does a science. It's our experiences and what we know works for our area and what a grower's willing to do, because some guys won't spray Gramoxone. I understand that. It might be the best for that case, but they just won't. So it's just working around all that and keeping labels in mind and crop size. There's a lot that goes into this.
No, that's good stuff, Jesse. I think it's being on both sides of that. It's so tempting that when you get the right weather to want to plant, right? Like that's our number one instinct, and it seems like in the spring, and that can burn you, especially if you're also the sprayer guy, right? Yeah. Because there's a lot of times that we just need to park the planter and make sure we get caught up on our ag chem applications, and then go back to planting, or we end up in some of the situations that we're in, for sure. Good stuff, Scott. I'll kick it to you last. I know I guess, from from watching the radar to the south that you've also been in the kind of the same scenario. And I know you've ran into some cover crop stuff you wanted to bring up, so I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, we're real similar. Been a pretty wet couple weeks since we all got together last. I know I should be getting tired of it by now because we definitely have a lot we need to get out and do, and I guess I'm getting close. But boy, I was so concerned about the drought 3 weeks ago. just how dry it was. I'm still just pretty pleased that we've got moisture now going into this season. But again, we need to. It's time to get back out and do stuff. I mean, even aside from the crops we're talking about, I mean, there's hay that needs to be made. And, I mean, there's just a lot of things that are, just a lot of things that need to get done. And one of the guys alluded to it. It's all going to happen in a short time. Pretty much looking at the same stuff the other guys that have spoke about. We've had a lot of discussions about replanting. Seemed like most of the crop that was up and out of the ground before all of the rain, general terms is in pretty decent shape. Stuff that was planted right before that is the question marks. I've not seen a lot of really tough conditions yet. Replant's a tough condition, is a tough situation when it's a no-brainer. It becomes less of a tough situation, I guess is what I'm saying. It's those really right on the line ones, and I haven't seen a lot of those yet in my area. I know they're out there, and I know we're probably going to see them once we can get across more fields in a better way. But definitely have some of those situations. And same on the beans. Jesse's comments. That's also something we're seeing. I mean, just a lot of stuff that has got away from us, and we're going to have to be pretty creative with those situations. The one that I guess I'm most concerned about up in our area, we have a lot of extend flex beans, but a lot of them will not have dicamba on them, either in season and in a lot of cases even pre. It's not part of the plan, So now you've got a really good bean, but the CP programs you're dealing with are Vector, Liberty, and Roundup. Well, you start dealing with a weed like mare's tail, and a lot of that has got pretty nasty all of a sudden. You're talking about something that's resistant to Roundup. So now you're back to dealing with 2,4-D. It's not a 2,4-D bean. It's a dicamba bean. And so those restrictions that Jesse alluded to, and even if you have to bump that rate higher, now you're needing to wait again. So just a lot of things that, whichever one of the guys said it, or I think it was Jesse again, I think we've just had 2 years where we could do anything we wanted and go out whenever we wanted, and I think it's caught us on some things, and it's really back to, I think, again, what Jesse said. It's a little more normal. This is what we've dealt with in the past, just not the last 18 months so much. On that same topic would be cover crops, and I don't know how widespread this is. I've had some pictures sent to me and a few phone calls. We've got a lot of guys out there, and I'm only going to get so specific because a lot of these situations there's just a lot of variables that change them. But I know there are a fair amount of guys that have waded into cover crops, maybe for the first time in the last 2-3 years. Their program was to go out, terminate early, and then plant, and that's gotten away from them now. Now we've got cereal rye that's almost head high in some cases. I guess my caution and what I wanted to bring up without getting way too specific, and Adam, you can speak to this way better than I can, just from firsthand experience you've had. And you're always one of my first calls when I get into one of these deals that gets a little touchy. But, if you're dealing with one of those really tall crops, just sticking to the program, going out and killing it and planting it, you may need to pivot at this time. Maybe a time you need to start looking at planting into it green. When you lay these crops over, particularly cereal rye, that's got some height to it, and maybe it's thicker than you would like it to be. A lot of guys kind of play with different rates, and we've ended up on the low side in a lot of cases. Folks have been successful with that. But if you're dealing with 50 pounds of cereal rye now that's head high, you're dealing with a lot of material, and you lay that over, and planting into it is a challenge. Getting a stand is even more of a challenge. I've seen these situations before where they're replanted 3 and 4 times throughout the season and they never have a stand. It is an incredible environment for disease now at this point. I mean, that's where we end up with our slugs. I mean, just on and on and on. So I'm not going to give real specifics here because there are multiple options. But it does get into, how's your planter set up? How, what are your other, what exactly are you doing equipment wise? So I guess I would just encourage a guy to ask questions. Every neighborhood's got, somebody that's been very experimental and tried it all. I know those guys in a lot of different areas. So if you don't know somebody like that, reach out to one of us, reach out to the folks at your local store. There's been a lot of knowledge gained in the last 10 to 15 years on cover crops. So, you don't have to go about it, totally on your own without getting some input. That was on beans. There's some similar situations still on fields that are intended to go to corn, and that's going to be even dicier. But just, don't panic, call around. There's some folks out there that can, help give you some other ideas and, give you the best chance to get a crop planted.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to quoting something that Jesse said. We got a lot of these from today, but he's very philosophical this morning. But it's more of an art, not a science, right? And it's not super prescriptive, but it depends on what the forecast looks like, what the calendar date is, what equipment you have parked in the shed, and all those kind of things. But you're exactly right, Scott. I will worry a little bit that we're going to get a window to spray and not a window to plant, because if we go out and make a termination pass and then catch another rain, you're talking, shooting fireworks off by the time that field's dried out. That as soon as you pass it with glyphosate to terminate that cover crop, you're stopping that transpiration that plant is doing. And from then it kind of goes down and dies. But as soon as that stuff stops transpiring water out of the ground, you've got a heck of a lot more water in the ground. And you thought it was hard to dry out before, it's going to be real hard to dry out, from then on. So definitely something that needs to be thought about. It's a lot easier to plant into when it's green because it will cut and things like that straight through. It starts to get kind of half dead, and then it'll wrap on anything that turns. And, there's very few turning parts on a modern planter, right? So you can create yourself a pretty big headache pretty quickly there. I guess the only other thing I'll add is that as you kind of stage some of this stuff, we get guys that want to ask or talk about rolling and some of those kind of things to get that cover crop on the ground. Keep in mind that has to be done at a very appropriate time. Otherwise it will stand right back up. So also it varies a little bit by species. Some species in these mixes do not roll, as in like it'll roll, but it will stand back up no matter what, even if you're, even if you got the crimper on your roller. So most of the time it's dough stage or later when those cover crops can be rolled and they will actually stay down. We're not there yet in most places. So you could pass a roller over a lot of these right now and they will stand back up because they're just now kind of flagging, falling off of the top of them. But those are a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. I don't worry too much until we get to that dough stage, Scott, because up until that point, even during pollination, if you can get it planted and sprayed, that cover crop will fall down remarkably quickly. It does not, that seed to N ratio does not really blow sky high until it starts seed set. So that extra lignin content is really kind of what keeps it standing there for so long. That can cause some issues. So good stuff.
Well, and I don't want to sound negative on cover crops. That's what, anytime I talk about the challenges, I feel like I have to throw that caveat in. I mean, we've seen a lot of good things. It's not for every place. It's not for every field, but we've seen a lot of positives with it. And I guess the situation I just described I've also seen guys who were getting along with it pretty well give it up because of that 1 year that,
Yep.
You had that situation. So trying to just kind of manage through it and learn something from this year as well so that we can keep the positives that we've been seeing.
That's right. That's a great point, Scott. If you want to see some positives of it, drive around in the first few hours after those 2.5-inch rains. because the amount of water and the difference in what's coming off of those fields is pretty remarkable.
Well, the one that finally got me on board, we had a huge rain event a few years ago on I remember it was like December 31st, because it was like we made up for our annual rainfall on like the 30th and 31st, whatever it was. And I was over driving around Martinsburg on like the January 2nd, and I mean, water's just pouring out of the fields. And there were multiple places where you were watching the water pour out of the, the ones that had the rye on them and the ones that did not. And it was dramatic. I mean, it looked like you could stick a glass down and drink out of the field with the cover crop, and, it was just mud rolling out of the others.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pain to deal with.
Oh yeah.
And it is a hassle, but when you see that, and when you see we lost a lot of soil in the last 10 days.
Oh yeah. We made up for a dry year, and that topsoil that rolls out onto the county road, you're not getting that back. So, all right. Anything else you guys want to make sure we cover this week before we kind of wrap this one up?
Shannon, I don't know if you're seeing it as much, but a lot of our wheat's laying down since we started getting all this rain, and it started heading, and we're at dough stage now. And I guess my point is, if you ain't got around to look at your wheat, you may want to make some laps.
Yeah, we've had a few fields that went down, or partial spots in the field. Really the spots that kind of overlap nitrogen.
I think that's our words, or just overlap.
Those guys that are pushing the line on nitrogen where we overlap just a little bit, those spots are down. I haven't really seen anything widespread across the whole field yet. But any more of these big storms like we've had the last 10 days, I mean, we've been having some high winds, especially with that, as that wheat fills, it won't take much and it'll go down.
Yeah. Moisture and wind, and it won't take much.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for all that you do for us at MFA. Thanks for taking the time this morning to jump on here and give some updates to everybody. Do really appreciate that. Just so everybody listening knows, this is not a mandatory thing. I'm not these guys' boss. I don't tell them to get up early and jump on this call every morning, but they do it anyway just to get good information out there. So we very much appreciate that. So thanks again to you guys, and thanks to everybody listening.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.